So let's take an opportunity right now just to recap on what kind of channels we actually have before deciding on what channels to focus on. So first up, we have our own websites, and that's basically our home for in the digital space. Then we have social media, and nowadays we can see clearly that social media is not just a trend, it is here to stay. And I hope that you remember all the different platforms that we have here, such as Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and so on. If you need a reminder, then please don't hesitate to go back to lesson 1 and just recap on what we spoke about there. And then we have PPC, which is pay per click advertising, which you will find for search engine marketing and also on some social media platforms such as Facebook. The next channel that we have is email. And then of course we spoke about affiliates. Remember, these are basically partnerships. That's what it comes down to. They are essentially partnerships, similar to influencers, but not exactly the same. But don't worry, we'll go into that in a bit more detail as we go into the next module. Then I'd just like to mention that there are 2 more channels that we haven't really spoken about so far, which are apps. So yes, the ones that you install on your phone that can be quite useful for ease of access and communication from business to client or potential customer. And then last but not least, we have SMS. And these are direct messages that are sent to your phone from the business to obviously give updates and provide some insight into what promotions might be happening, or obviously some updates with regards to your current membership with that company, which can obviously be used really aggressively or very lightheartedly. But again, you don't want to really come across as spammy, so that needs to be well orientated and well thought after before implemented. Next up, I'd like to show you some different media buying options, and that essentially means how or when you want to pay. Okay, so please take as many notes down as you possibly can on this, because it is vitally important information. First up, there is CPC, and that is cost per click. So you basically pay every time someone clicks on your ad. And this is not to be confused with PPC, which is pay per click, which is just a type of ad. Okay, there's a big difference between the two. So pay per click is a campaign where you pay for clicks, and CPC is cost per click. Please write that down. And this is how much you would actually pay for each click. Then we have CPM, which stands for cost per mile, and that cost per 1,000 impressions, that is. Mile is Latin and stands for 1,000. And then we have the CPV, which is a cost per view, and this metric specifically applies to videos and video ads. Then we have CPA, which is the cost per acquisition. So for example, an acquisition could be a sign up. And then we have CPL, which is the cost per lead. So a fee would be charged every time a user fills in their details in a lead form. And then we have the CPE, which stands for cost per engagement. When we talk about the engagements in the digital marketing sphere, it's basically like an interaction. Now think about that. For example, an interaction needs to be well understood. It's actually a conversation being had with the client. And this conversation can be in the form of many different types. If you publish a YouTube video, for example, and someone comments on it or shares it, for example, that would be a type of engagement. These are pretty much some of the metrics that we'd be looking at when working on a campaign. For example, if you have a campaign where the objective is leads, then one of the metrics you need to measure to determine the success of your campaign would be CPL, cost per lead, because obviously you would need to make sure that it is not too high or low based on whatever your goals are. There are other metrics that will help you determine that, but CPL would be, of course, one of them, and obviously one of the main ones when running a lead campaign. And I need you to remember that as we progress. Apart from the acronyms for media buying options, there are a few more different avenues that we can actually take. You might think it's only a bit of Google Ads or social media, but you'll find there's a whole lot more in the digital marketing sphere. And I promise, it's not just a bunch of acronyms. Today's lesson is meant to just give you an overview so that you'll be able to navigate the digital marketing world and don't get confused with all the terms. So first up, in the digital marketing, we have SEO, which stands for Search Engine Optimization. Please write that down. Something we already mentioned. And this means optimizing your website so that you can appear closer to the top of the page. So when users search something, you want your content to appear That's essentially the whole purpose of what SEO achieves. That's what SEO is about, ladies and gents. And I want you to remember that each and every step that we take together through this program, because that's essentially where the world is transitioning into, is appearance in front of the client or the potential client whenever they search anything related to your company's main topic. It's a type of organic marketing. Then we have SEM, which stands for search engine marketing. This essentially refers to pay-per-click campaigns. And we had a look at this a little bit earlier in the lesson. So like Google Ads and Microsoft advertising, for example, any type of ads you would put up on a search engine would be considered as this concept. And then last but not least, we have SMM, which stands for social media marketing. This is about marketing on these different types of social media channels. So first of all, what is retargeting, ladies and gents? Think about it. We spoke about it time and time again, and I just need you to kind of just jump to the conclusion now based on the information that we've already spoken about. Well, essentially, remarketing ability actually depends on the platform to kick off with. So according to the Gartner's Digital Marketing Glossary, retargeting is the use of a website tracker to target visitors elsewhere. For example, with display ads or email marketing, and then lure them back to complete the conversion. All right, so turning them from a prospective into a closed deal. And then these trackers is what we already spoke about. The cookies, right? We spoke about cookies a couple of lessons ago, but simply put, your online activity is always being tracked, okay? So that is, if you look for a product or visit a website, you will see these ads or products again and again on other websites that you visit, or you might receive an email that you didn't complete a purchase. That is retargeting. Any additional contact with users who have interacted with your business before all falls into the same category of understanding. Some marketers make a differentiation between retargeting and remarketing. Right now, you need to understand the difference between the two. It's very important. With retargeting referring specifically to display ads and remarketing to emails only. Though Google does call it retargeting options on Google Ads, remarketing, it all gets a little bit confusing at times, but don't worry too much about the names. Digital marketers have a talent for coming up with 10 names for the same thing, so don't stress about it too much. The most important thing for you to remember right now, though, is that the option exists in email and in ad display format. So what are some of the benefits of retargeting? Well, first of all, you know that retargeting targets users who are already interested in what you have to offer, as they have already interacted with your business before. This means that a conversion is likelier to happen as your content is shown to someone who you know is already interested and has heard of you before, which means that there's much higher chance of leading them down the sales funnel. And then, of course, you can reinforce your brand image and remind them of who you are and what you do. Very likely, users will not immediately buy off of you just because they've seen one ad, but you will need to reinforce a message several times, and retargeting always helps achieve that. Then, also a great way to remarket your product or service across several devices and multiple channels is to say someone visits your website on the phone, for example, and while later they see your ad again on their computer browser on a different platform. That's a great way to really get more coverage and reposition yourself where your users are. So the great diversity that you can actually apply with regards to your marketing efforts needs to be embarked on with regards to remarketing. You need cross-device activity. It absolutely is necessary if you're going to find some sort of success in your targeting and remarketing efforts. And then retargeting is a cost-effective method, as you're not wasting a budget on a broad audience who might have never heard of you before, but rather you are actually targeting people who are at least in the awareness and more than likely in the interest phase along your funnel structure. So keep that in mind, but obviously just keep track of where the bulk of your clients are throughout this entire process. So as you know, one of the reasons that you are using remarketing is the message that is being reinforced several times. Now in marketing, there is a concept called the rule of 7. It's quite an old rule, so you might have heard about it before, but it basically means that the customers have to see your ad 7 times before they actually make a purchase. So nowadays, there's much more advertisements and placements everywhere you go. Users get bombarded by marketing messages, so the amount is probably higher. but the number itself is not necessarily the most important thing. But the point is that users get to see your message many times before making the purchase, and that's something that we actually need to achieve. Now, as with anything, it would suggest monitoring your performance. We don't just want users to suffer from ad fatigue, right, and get too used to seeing our ad and actually not looking into it properly, which is where they will obviously see your ad so many times. The ad loses the effect, right? We don't want that fatigue to kick in. And retargeting helps in spreading the same message, but in different formats, on different platforms, essentially, so it doesn't get too bland. One thing to keep in mind though is that when it comes down to retargeting, it's all depending on the different platforms. You will have different options to retarget, but no matter the platform, you will need to set up your tracking first. Otherwise, you won't actually be able to get any data that you could utilize. And if you don't know, or if Google or any other platforms don't know who the users of the website are, then it's impossible for you to actually get your ads displayed to them, because then your remarketing or retargeting efforts actually don't have any sort of meaning or base to them. So if you haven't already done so, make sure that you set up your tracking, or at least Google Analytics. Speak to your developer if it's not something that you feel comfortable with doing yourself, and I'm sure they will be able to do it in an absolute heartbeat. But we'll be looking at setting up Facebook tracking pixel as well in coming modules. So stay tuned for that, and it's something that you can really get excited for because it's an absolute game changer. And by then you'll be able to apply the process to many other platforms as well. Now, when it comes to retargeting, you would ideally want to split your audience up into different lists or segments as people who interact with your brand in different ways, right? There's many different people out there that you're trying to target and different ways that they actually interact with your brand. So you want to be able to split them up into different segments. It's only going to be easier for you to manage them like that. You could target people who viewed a more specific page once. For example, people who have visited checkout pages but haven't actually completed their purchase. We could also target people who are based on so many different pages they visited, for example. So more than a certain amount of pages, that would be a signal that they could be interested in the brand and might potentially be interested in making a purchase. You could create a time-based list and exclude them from one another. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you have converters over the last 7 days and also over the last 30 days. Exclude the 7-day from the 30-day list, because people who converted less 7 days away are probably less likely to convert again. I'll give you a few more examples of that in just a bit to make a bit more sense of it, but just keep that in mind for now. Then let's say, or post engages, okay? You could exclude your page followers from the list and then encourage whoever else is engaged to join your page or even just sign up. So just to make you aware or to confirm that you don't have to like a page in order to see its content. You could have a friend who follows it as well. It could be something that was quite viral over a certain period of time, which was quite popular amongst your friends, or friends' friends, or their friends' friends. The list could go on. So yes, you don't actually have to like a page to see its contents. And then you could have a list of site visitors over the last 30 days and include engages over social engages over the last 30 days. And then target them with more aggressive sell than the others. Now you could also take your converters over the last 90 days and exclude them from the 30-day converters, and then sell some products to people who converted between 31 and 90 days. Again, it all really just depends on your actual business. This might not work for you if you sell cars, for example. If you sell a car to someone, it's very unlikely that they're going to buy a car from you again anytime soon. We have spoken about keywords a lot, and these are pretty important as we want to appear under the correct search terms, right? But what about all the other advertising options that we saw that are not based on specific keywords? And we might want to narrow down who we appear for, rather than just appearing for the masses for a specific term. That's where our non-keyword targeting actually comes into play. So let's just quickly check that out. So first up, we can choose whether we want our ads only to be shown on different devices, so mobile or desktop. And then we can also differentiate by gender. If you specifically produce a product for men, why advertise to women? And then have a location. right? So that especially comes in handy if you sell products or services that are only available within a specific region, or if you have a brick and mortar store with no delivery options. There is no point in advertising for people who can't actually purchase your product outright. And then of course we have remarketing, which is something that we have mentioned already. And in this case, we would actively try to show our ads to people who have visited our website already. So let's get into that in a little bit more detail, as this is a very valuable targeting method to set up properly. Remember which tool is tracking all the site's visits and actions to our website? Well, of course, it's actually Google Analytics. And please write that down if you didn't know that from the get-go. So if you want to make use of remarketing, you'll need to link your Google Analytics to your Google Ads account, as Google Ads takes the information about who has actually interacted with your site from Google Analytics. And there you can set up different lists. Do you want to target anyone who has visited your site? Everyone who hasn't completed a purchase? These are very things to actually keep important things to keep in mind. Only people who have actually completed a purchase could be something pretty interesting to track as well. The options are really endless and really up to you based on the nature of your business. We'll speak about remarketing a bit more in the next lesson when we're actually putting together our full digital strategy. So I hope you'll join me then. It's going to be an absolutely valuable thing to know and incorporate into your business. Then for display ads specifically, you can match the site content, which means that you can choose which sites to actually place your ads on, whether it's content keywords, so the content of the site or the content topics, and you can also choose the specific placements, so specific websites where your ad would actually pop up. Not all are available, but it is based on what you add. Other suggestions will appear too. With programmatic buying, which is a different kind of display network, you would have a broader range of placements to choose from, but you're only ever going to be doing programmatic buying if you have a huge budget. So for now, we'll just focus on what matters to us the most. Then we have interest. So you can target people based on what they're interested in, which is why we need to get to know our customers so well. Think of your buyer personas. We have similar audiences, which are basically targets of people who match your site visitors or are, well, similar at least. And then we have finally in market, and that is a group of people who, according to Google, are ready to buy. One more thing to note about your Google ads is that there are some policies that we need to stick to. So always keep an eye out to your emails after registering on these different platforms.